Look, it's been 7 days. I mean, it's incredible to think that 7 days ago the UK was voting, and since we've had a new cabinet, they've met, we have new policy from Rachel Reeves. What do you think has been the most decisive moment for Labour in the last 7 days?
I think it would have to be Rachel Reeves' first big speech at the Treasury. I think there we saw a real shift in British politics writ large. We saw a government come in which is effectively fully committed to economic growth, such that they are going to make big changes in the planning system. They're basically given carte blanche to Ed Miliband and Angela Rayner to push through house building, to push through more energy infrastructure. That is a significant moment that, I think will have ramifications for a long time to come. And as you mentioned, Keir Starmer also having his big introduction on the world stage at this NATO summit in Washington, meeting President Biden, meeting President Zelensky. Politics moves fast, and this has been a very fast week.
So, Joe, what did we learn actually from Rachel Reeves? I know there was, two things. We're still waiting for a lot more detail on the workplace, on, how some of the worker rights will be affected. We still have to wait a lot of stuff on taxation. But she talked about this new sovereign wealth fund. What does it look like?
Yeah, so she talks about this national wealth fund, which we had a report come out from Mark Carney, who's been leading a task force, which is advising on how it could be structured. Now, the aim is to crowd in lots of private investment at a time where the state doesn't have much money to spend on boosting economic growth, crowding that private investment. And that report was looking at different options and different funding options that investors could be attracted by. Still more details to come on that, but that's all now in train. Rachel Reeves has said there'll be an international investment summit within the next 100 days, again, as part of an effort to bring in that private capital. So that's one big part of the picture. And then as we're talking about on the planning side, she was saying that they're bringing back mandatory national house building targets. There's going to be a real push to unblock construction, make things happen that weren't happening before. So it's a two-pronged approach, really. It's private investment plus big planning reform.
Joe, is it very important for international investors that they get the planning rights just to make sure that they mean business? Or how long will the honeymoon last? I know there's also, you joined us for a great podcast on this, which I think is out today. So thank you to Summer for putting it together. But is it 100 days or does it last less, this honeymoon period?
Well, I think my sense is that the honeymoon period will probably last until the first budget, which is going to come in the autumn. We don't have a specific date yet, but that'll be when Rachel Reeves will have to make some pretty tough decisions on tax and spend. Bloomberg reporting this morning that she could face a fiscal hole of up to £30 billion if the OBR reduces growth forecasts. And that would mean that she'd have to find some tax increases to fill that hole, or spending cuts. Spending cuts would be pretty undesirable for a Labour government that's just newly in power. And then when it comes to tax hikes, well, the Labour manifesto really did restrict what they could do. They can't increase income tax, national insurance, VAT, all these big levers you might want to pull. So she's perhaps going to look at kind of salami slicing other more minor taxes to raise some money. So that would be a tricky moment. But you're right, on the planning side, just one more thought here is that investors want to know that if they commit money to projects, those projects will actually happen. And that's why they've not been able to have that confidence in recent years because of things like the effects of Brexit, the uncertainty that caused, because of the Conservative government's reticence to really back construction in the face of kind of NIMBY pressure. We know the Labour Party, at least on the evidence of Rachel Reeves, they're not going to be swayed by that kind of opposition. So that's why I think it's kind of a green light in the eyes of investors that construction projects will now happen in the UK that didn't happen before.
Joe, what have we heard from, Keir Starmer at NATO? Again, he comes in, it's his first major international outing. He has a good majority, and he's in charge for 5 years. It feels very different to some of the question marks over the other leaders.
Yeah, I think two big things we've seen. One is that he's really looking to build a closer relationship with Europe. He's working on securing a defence and security pact with Europe quickly. We have that European political community meeting happening next week. He's taken with him a large entourage of ministers, including Nick Thomas-Symonds, who is installed in the Cabinet Office as his minister effectively in charge of European relations. That's a real sign of intent, I think. He's meeting Chancellor Scholz as well. And President Biden was welcoming this change in tone from the UK and is actually saying that the UK is the knot that holds NATO together and how he supports that closer relationship with Europe. He thinks that will strengthen the kind of alliance of Western liberal democracies. So that was the big move on Europe. And then also we had him saying that he was committed to allowing Ukraine to continue using those Storm Shadow missiles in the way that they wanted, effectively giving them permission to strike in Russia. That's an important permission that President Zelensky has welcomed. So, yeah, kind of a clear commitment on Ukraine, plus that move towards a closer relationship with Europe, which is quite significant.